Nadia had two rules she never broke: never lie to a patient and never falsify a chart. She broke neither on the night Darian Holt came in, bleeding from a knife wound he swore was from a kitchen accident. She cleaned the wound, documented exactly what she saw, and filed her report the way the hospital required. By morning, 3 men in dark coats were waiting by the staff entrance. The St. Aurelius Medical Center sat at the edge of downtown Toronto, close enough to the financial district that the parking garage cost $40 a day, and the gift shop sold $15 smoothies. Nadia Osei had worked the overnight surgical prep ward for 4 years, long enough to know which residents skipped hand hygiene, and which attendings had a thing about the temperature of their coffee. She was good at her job because she paid attention. She noticed things. That habit had never once caused her a problem, until Darian Holt. He'd come in through the ER on a Tuesday, which was already a bad sign. Tuesdays at St. Aurelius were the kind of nights where every bay filled by midnight, and the vending machine on the 3rd floor ran out of everything except lemon-lime chips. Nadia was covering a shift for a colleague who'd called in sick, which meant she was already running on 6 hours of sleep, and the memory of a sandwich she'd eaten at 4 in the afternoon. The paramedics had described the wound as self-inflicted. Darian had nodded along when they said it, his eyes steady, his jaw loose with painkillers the EMTs had administered in the ambulance. He was maybe 19. Nice-looking kid. If you didn't notice the way his hands kept checking the zipper on his jacket, or the fact that his shoes were clean and dry despite the rain that had been hammering Queen Street for the past 2 hours. Nadia noticed both. She prepped him for the attending on call, Dr. Marchetti, and in the 5 minutes she had alone with him before the doctor arrived, she asked him quietly if there was anything he wanted to add to what the paramedics had said. Darian looked at the ceiling, then at the door, then at her. Kitchen accident, he said. Nadia wrote it down. Then she wrote down what she'd actually observed. Wound angle inconsistent with self-infliction. Patient alert and oriented, displaying avoidance behaviors, possible concealment of incident. She added it to the file the way the hospital's incident protocol required, initialed it, and flagged it for the charge nurse before her shift ended at 7. She didn't think about it again until the men were waiting for her at the staff entrance. There were 3 of them, not hospital security. She knew all of security by face, and these men wore the kind of suits that didn't come off a rack at Hudson's Bay. One of them held a paper coffee cup with the St. Aurelius Cafe logo on the side, which struck her as almost funny given the circumstances. Like they'd been waiting long enough to need a coffee. Like they'd been patient. Mrs. Osei, the one in the center said. He was the tallest of the 3, with close cropped grey at his temples and an accent she couldn't immediately place, somewhere between English and something else, slightly clipped. "Could we have a few minutes of your time?" "I'm off shift," Nadia said. She didn't stop walking. "We know," he said. "That's why we're here now rather than earlier. We didn't want to interrupt your work." She stopped. That particular phrasing, polite, deliberate, carrying the faint suggestion that interrupting her work would have been an option they'd considered and set aside, made the back of her neck go cold. "Who are you?" she asked. "My name is Beaumont," the tall one said. "We represent the family of the young man you admitted last night." She looked at him steadily. "Patient information is confidential." "We're not asking about the patient." Beaumont smiled, and it was the kind of smile that involved all the right muscles, in all the right places, and communicated absolutely nothing about the person behind it. "We're asking about the notes." Nadia's file had been flagged and signed and logged into the system 18 hours ago. It wasn't a secret. It was exactly what hospital protocol required her to do. She had done her job correctly. She reminded herself of this fact, the way people sometimes repeat a phone number when they're walking across a room and don't have anything to write it down on. "The notes are part of a standard patient record," she said. "If the family has concerns, they can speak to patient relations during business hours." "We'd prefer to speak to you," Beaumont said. "I'm sure you would." She kept walking. She heard one of the other men step forward, and then Beaumont said something in a low voice, and the footsteps stopped. She made it to the parking structure, found her car, sat in it for a full minute with her hands in her lap before she started the engine. Her hands were not shaking. She was fairly proud of that. She called her charge nurse from the road. Priyanka picked up on the second ring, which meant she was already at the desk with coffee and would be for another 4 hours. 3 men in suits were waiting for me at the staff entrance, Nadia said. They said they represent Darian Holt's family. There was a pause on the line. The kitchen accident, kid? Yeah. Another pause longer. Nadia, that kid's last name is Holt. I know his last name, as in Gareth Holt. She didn't say anything. As in Gareth Holt, who owns the Holt Tower and half of King West and has basically been running the waterfront development that every city councillor has been too scared to vote against for 6 years. I filed a routine incident note, Nadia said. I did exactly what the protocol says. I know you did, Priyanka said. I countersigned it. She was quiet again for a moment. You should probably call your union rep. Nadia did call her union rep. She also called her sister, who was a paralegal in Mississauga, and whose primary contribution to the conversation was to say, "Oh God," 3 times in a row, and then ask if Nadia wanted to come stay with her for a while. Nadia said no. She went home. She fed her cat, a large, irritable tabby named Caruso, who communicated his feelings entirely through the volume and frequency of his meowing. And she ate toast standing over the sink, and she told herself that what she had done was correct and that correctness had to count for something. She slept badly. The next morning she received a call from the hospital's director of patient services, a woman named Dr. Yolanda Marsh, who had an office on the 6th floor that smelled like printer toner and the particular kind of anxiety that lives in institutions. Dr. Marsh told her, in a voice that was careful and not unkind, that the hospital had received a formal inquiry from a legal representative of the Holt family regarding her incident documentation. The notes I filed were accurate, Nadia said. I'm sure they were, Dr. Marsh said. They were consistent with what I observed. No one is disputing that. Then what are we talking about? Dr. Marsh cleared her throat. The family is suggesting that the framing of the notes may have been unnecessarily speculative and could expose the hospital to liability. I documented observable clinical signs and flagged a potential safeguarding concern. That's not speculation. That's the job. There was a silence on the line that felt like a room full of people looking carefully at the floor. Nadia, Dr. Marsh said, I want to support you in this, truly, but I also need you to understand that Gareth Holt's foundation donated the imaging wing on the 4th floor, and his daughter sits on our board. Nadia sat with that for a moment. So what are you asking me to do? She said. I'm not asking you to do anything, Dr. Marsh said very carefully. I'm just making sure you have the full picture. Nadia thanked her and hung up. She sat at her kitchen table for a long time after that. Caruso jumped up and walked across her laptop, and then settled on the chair across from her, watching her with the disinterested authority of a cat who has never once in his life been asked to compromise on anything. She thought about the angle of the wound. She thought about Darian's shoes, dry at 2 in the morning in the middle of a rainstorm. She thought about the way he'd looked at the door. She did not change the notes. She went to her next shift. She did her job. She was professional and precise, and she did not think about the men in suits until the 4th day, when she came out of a long prep shift to find a business card slipped under the door of her locker. It said, Gareth Holt, Holt Group. And below that, handwritten in blue ink, when you're ready to talk. She turned it over. Nothing on the back. She put it in her pocket and went home and fed Caruso and stood in her kitchen for a long time, thinking about what ready to talk meant in the context of a man who had his people leave handwritten notes in locked staff areas of a hospital. She called the number. It rang twice. A woman answered, very efficient, and told Nadia that Mr. Holt would see her the following Thursday at 11 in the morning. Not would she like an appointment. Not would Thursday work. Just Thursday 11. Nadia said yes before she'd consciously decided to say anything. She spent the next week not telling anyone about it. She told Priyanka she had a dentist appointment. She told her sister she was fine. She told herself that she was just going to hear him out, which was a reasonable thing to do, and that knowing what someone wanted from you was always better than not knowing. The Holt Group offices occupied 3 floors of a tower on Bay Street. The lobby had the particular kind of quiet that only money can buy. Not absence of sound, but a calibration of it, carpets and height, and carefully placed surfaces conspiring to take the edge off everything. A woman in a grey blazer met Nadia at the elevator and walked her to a sitting area outside a set of double doors and offered her water. Nadia took the water. She drank half of it. Then the doors opened. She had looked Gareth Holt up, of course. She knew he was 53. She knew he had a daughter, Celeste, who sat on 4 charitable boards and was photographed at openings. She knew he'd built the company from a mid-sized property development firm into something that now had holdings in 4 provinces. The photographs she'd found online were the usual executive variety, controlled, a little distant, the smile of a man who'd learned to perform warmth without deploying it. The man who stood up from behind the desk was taller than the photographs suggested. He had the kind of stillness that expensive suits couldn't account for, something held back and measured even in the simple act of rising from a chair. His hair was dark with threads of silver at the temples, and his eyes were the particular shade of grey that photographs always flattened into something unremarkable. "Mrs. Osei," he said, "thank you for coming." "I wasn't sure I should," Nadia said, "but you came anyway. I like to know what people want from me." He gestured toward the chairs opposite the desk and sat back down when she did. He didn't say anything right away, which she found unexpected. She'd prepared herself for a sales pitch, or a legal position, or some version of the careful language Dr. Marsh had used. She hadn't prepared herself for someone who just sat and looked at her like he was trying to determine something specific. "The notes you filed," he said eventually. "They were accurate," she said. "I know they were." He said it simply, without the careful qualification she'd heard from everyone else. "Not I'm sure they were, or no one is disputing that. Just, I know that's not why I asked you here." Nadia felt something shift slightly in the room. She kept her face neutral. "Darian has been lying to me for 6 months, Gareth said. About where he is, about who he's spending time with, about what he does between 10 in the evening and 2 in the morning. He set his hands flat on the desk, not fidgeting, just placing them. "You're the first person who wrote down what was actually in front of you instead of what he told you to write." Nadia was quiet for a moment. "That's my job," she said. "Yes," Gareth said. "It is." He paused. "My people asked you to change those notes. Your people asked me to consider whether they were unnecessarily speculative." The corner of his moved. It wasn't a smile exactly, but it had the shape of one. "Is that what they said?" "More or less." He looked at her steadily. "I didn't ask them to do that." She held his gaze. She was not certain she believed him. She was not certain she didn't. He had the specific quality of someone who said things he meant, which was not the same thing as someone who said everything he meant. "What did you ask them to do?" she said. "Find out who filed the flag," which is a different request. "Not from where I was standing at the staff entrance." He had the grace to look, if not apologetic, then at least considered. "I'm sorry for how that was handled," he said. "Beaumont has a tendency toward efficiency over nuance. That's a generous way to put it. I'm aware." He leaned back slightly. "I need to understand what happened to my son that night. The police report says kitchen accident. His friends say kitchen accident. He says kitchen accident. Your notes say something different." "My notes say the wound presentation was inconsistent with self-infliction," Nadia said. "That's a clinical observation. I'm not an investigator." "No," he said. "But you noticed." He said the last word like it meant something specific, like it was the actual thing he was getting at. "A ward full of people processed my son and wrote down what he told them to write, except you. The silence in the room was different from the silence in the lobby, less designed. I have a responsibility to document accurately," Nadia said. "That's all it was." "My son is 19 years old," Gareth said. "He is also, I've recently learned, involved with people I spent a significant portion of the last decade trying to keep him away from. Because his mother's brother has certain associations, and Darian, because he is 19, and because I apparently failed to communicate this clearly enough, finds those associations interesting." His voice was even throughout this, measured and clear. The evenness cost him something, she could see that, the way a wall costs the thing it's holding back. "That's not information I should have," Nadia said carefully. "No," he agreed, "it isn't. I'm telling you because I want you to understand that the reason my people came to the hospital was not to suppress your documentation. It was because I panicked," he said the last word without softening it, "and I handled a panic response badly, and people in my orbit don't always know how to execute a bad call with any kind of grace." Nadia looked at him. She thought about what it cost a man like this to use the word panicked in a sentence about himself. "What do you want from me, Mr. Holt?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "I wanted to apologize in person, and I wanted to meet the person who did her job correctly when it would have been very easy not to." She didn't say anything for a moment. "That's it," she said. "That's it." She stood up. He stood when she did, which she noticed. "Your son should have a follow-up appointment," she said. "And not at St. Aurelius if he's going to keep having kitchen accidents." The corner of his mouth moved again. This time it went far enough to qualify as something. "I'll take that under advisement." She picked up her bag. She was almost at the door when he spoke again. "Messieurs Osei," she turned. He was still standing behind the desk, hands at his sides, looking at her with the same quality of attention he'd had when she walked in, direct, and without the particular kind of performance that usually came with it. "I hope the hospital hasn't made things difficult for you." "Nothing I can't manage," she said. "If that changes," he said, "call the number." She left. She thought about it on the subway home. She thought about it for the 3 days after that. She thought about Gareth Holt saying, "I panicked," with the same steady voice he'd used for everything else. And she thought about what it meant that he'd apologized for something he could have simply not apologized for. And she thought about the specific way he'd said "you noticed." Like noticing was the rarest thing in the world. She did not call the number. Darian Holt appeared at the hospital 12 days later, not as a patient. He was standing in the corridor outside the prep ward when Nadia came off her shift, wearing a jacket that was considerably less expensive than anything she'd seen his father in, his hands in his pockets, looking like someone who had rehearsed what to say, and was no longer sure it was the right thing. "I wanted to say sorry," he said, "for the trouble." Nadia looked at him. He had the same grey eyes as his father, which she noticed now that she was looking. "You didn't cause the trouble," she said. "The trouble came from people who wanted me to say something other than what was true." "I know," he said. "I know that wasn't right." He looked at the floor for a moment. "My dad told me what you said, about how I should get a follow-up somewhere else." He paused. "We found a clinic in Etobicoke. I've been going." She nodded. "Good." He nodded too, and there was something in the exchange that was simpler than either of them had expected. She thought about what @Rainbow's Mom 1 had written in some other context entirely, about showing what a kid could grow up to become. She thought this might be the beginning of that for Darian, or it might not. 19 was a long way from any particular outcome. "Take care of yourself," she said, and meant it. She was unlocking her bike at the rack by the east entrance when she heard someone behind her and turned to find Gareth Holt standing 6 feet away, wearing a wool coat that was the color of a winter sky over Lake Ontario, and looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him in the office, something slightly less composed. "He called me from the subway," Gareth said. "Told me he'd come to say something to you, I thought." He stopped, recalibrated. "I thought I'd come by." "You thought you'd come by St. Aurelius Hospital," Nadia said, "on the chance that your son had come by St. Aurelius Hospital." "Yes," he said, like this was straightforward. "That's a 40-minute drive from Bay Street." The traffic wasn't bad. She looked at him in the grey Toronto afternoon, under the flat November sky, with the streetcar bell going somewhere on Queen Street, and the smell of the hospital coffee cart drifting from the entrance behind her. She thought about the card with its handwritten note. She thought about a man who used the word panicked without softening it and apologized when he didn't have to, and drove 40 minutes, because his son had done something decent. And he apparently needed to be in proximity to that. "There's a decent coffee place 2 blocks down," she said. "If you want." He looked at her. Something shifted in his face, a small, careful movement, like a calculation completed and then set down. "I want," he said. She wheeled her bike, and he walked beside her, and the streetcar went past, and the city moved around them the way it always does, indifferent and loud, and not at all aware of how much it sometimes takes for 2 people to simply walk somewhere together. She had 2 rules she never broke. That Tuesday night with a 19-year-old kid and a dry pair of shoes in a rainstorm, she'd thought she was just following the first one. It took her until the sidewalk outside Federica's Coffee on Elm Street to understand that it had quietly become something else entirely.